Good morning on this Tuesday of the 8th week of Ordinary Time. Today we'll look at 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 10 to 16, which can be divided into two parts. That is this reading. The first part deals with what St. Peter was building on yesterday. Okay, so the gospel concerns the salvation of our souls. And Peter wants to emphasize, and again, this is very interesting that St. Peter is telling us this. I'll explain why in just a minute. But St. Peter wants to tell us that the message concerning the Messiah and that the Messiah had to suffer in order to enter into his glory is something that's been consistent in the Old Testament. So when Jesus argues with the Pharisees, Sadducees, and many other people who didn't come to believe in him, and also, again, fascinating that Peter is telling us, even his own disciples didn't understand that Scripture, that is the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, had a suffering Messiah who entered into his glory. That aspect was not emphasized, it was forgotten, it wasn't understood, whatever the reason is. But like, for example, go to the Gospel of Luke, the Way to Emmaus account, where Jesus is walking with these two individuals, again, most likely a husband and a wife, and he had to break open to them that the Messiah, that is, break open the Scripture, that the Messiah had to suffer and die. And so now Peter is telling us this, one who did not understand, one who did not come to faith right away with this, in the fact that Jesus had to suffer and die. Remember, Peter was that one who stepped in front of Jesus when Jesus told him that the Son of Man was going to be handed over and crucified. Peter stepped in front of Jesus and said, "Far be it, Lord, that I should ever let that happen to you." So Peter is speaking from a perspective of one who would not accept this and now has accepted it. And again, what's the hinge? What's the turning point in all this? Well, Peter is a witness of the passion, death, resurrection of Jesus Christ. So that's the first part, that God is consistent and that God was going to overcome our suffering, overcome our death by entering it into himself, which again is something that he promised in the prophets throughout the whole Testament. The second half of today's first reading begins a three-part subsection that Peter's going to cover over the next couple of days, I assume, in our church's liturgy, in our readings. These three parts are the call to holiness, the call to love, and then the call to be a new priestly people serving in the new temple. And so we only get a little tidbit of the first subsection, which is the call to holiness. So let's look at a couple lines at this very quickly. He says this, therefore, okay, so that's how we know it's a transition. Okay, like I said, this first reading is two parts. So here's the transition into the second part. Therefore, gird up the loins of your mind, live soberly, and set your hopes completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. That phrase, gird up the loins, maybe a modern day example that we use is to roll up your sleeves, okay? So this idea of gird up your loins, again, it's like tuck in your garments is what Peter's telling us. And in Peter's time, that would mean like tuck in your garments to get ready to work. It's like a call to attention, a call to action. Okay, so Peter's saying like roll up your sleeves, listen up, okay? Live soberly, okay? And set your hopes completely on the grace to you by the revelation of Jesus Christ. So Peter wants us to call attention, okay, the grace and hope that Jesus has given us. Also, when you read 1 Peter, think also of the Passover. So gird up your loins is a first allusion to the Passover. That was the Israelites' first instruction to get ready for the Passover, because it's like, get ready, you're ready to move, okay? So there's going to be many allusions to the Passover here. Then he says, Like obedient children, do not act in compliance with the desires of your former ignorance. Okay? So, something we should be teaching our children, which is very difficult to do here in America. The idea is just because you have a desire or passion for something doesn't mean you should just necessarily obtain it. Okay, so obedient children, meaning that, you know how when you raise children, they want ice cream instead of dinner. Like that's what their passions tell us. And you're like, and you got to be like, no, you got to eat your protein first, right? Got to eat your meal first, then you can have the dessert. And so children are called to be obedient to that, which I'm sure many of you know that's very difficult to do. A lot of times, parents will give in and just give the child what they want so they don't scream. But the idea is in the training, not only with just children, but in our spiritual lives, to live soberly. But the idea is we're not to be just ruled by our just passions and desires alone. They always got to be guided by good reason, and they also got to be guided by the revelation of God. Sometimes we have to say no to those things. And so why do we do that? Well, because of the last line of today's first reading. Has he called you, but has he who called you is holy? Be holy yourselves in every aspect of your conduct, for it is written, here's a quote from Leviticus, be holy because I am holy. So our holiness is not an impersonal thing. It's not just a random thing God's asking us to do, but it's asking us to participate in the revelation, in the mind, in the attitude of God. Holiness means to set apart. How are we set apart? By acting in the ways of God, which are often contrary to the ways of the world. Again, the world tells us, be ruled by your passions, whatever you want, whatever you desire, obtain it. Satisfying your own wants and needs is your ultimate goal and purpose of life. That's what the world tells us. God tells us to live differently. To be holy, to be in covenant, to be in relationship with God, which again is focused on primarily on the next subsection, which is what? The call to love, the call to charity. But that will be following more tomorrow. Sorry about that, went 7.5 minutes, but we'll keep continuing on this great reading by our letter from St. Peter. May God bless you and enjoy your day.